If you want to move from WordPress to Webflow, there's a cost. If you want to move from Webflow to WordPress, there's a cost. You can't entirely future proof. The best you can do is in the moment gauge the cost to benefit ratio. So even if Webflow in quotes shuts down in like 5-10 years, and your marketing team has been able to run hundreds of marketing landing pages.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Teapots, the Pulse of Tech podcast, where we have insightful conversations about building digital products, brands, and teams, as well as explore a lot of challenges in the tech industry. As always, this is Lady Adeniyi, your host, and I'm super excited to have you here today. In today's episode, we dive into the fascinating world of no-code tools. I'm sure a lot of people have been extremely curious about the new wave of no-code tools, and a lot of influencers have been talking about this a lot. As you know, joining us for the second time is the amazing Daniel Abudu. Welcome again, Daniel.
Hi.
And this time, the topic is going to be understanding the usefulness of no-code tools. So let's get right into it. I don't think we need to do introductions again because we did in the last episode, so we won't go deep into your background. So if you want to know more about Daniel and how Daniel started his journey and how he got to where he is right now, go and listen to our previous episode. The title is The Freelance Mindset. So I'm just going to jump right into questions relating to no-code tools. What are some of the no-code tools you use, and what inspired you to explore them instead of traditional coding practices? I guess we can start with that.
Okay, so I mostly use Webflow, dabbled in Framer, Airtable. Yeah, there are a bunch of other stuff like Zapier and stuff. A lot of things are no-code tools, depending on how you think about it. But I've done the whole Webflow as front end, Airtable as back end. There are different ways you can do that. So how I got into no-code was like the next logical step for me. I was in a phase where I was just bored, and I didn't enter it as no code. I just entered it as a Webflow dev, and it was a unique positioning for me because I was in the midst of so many designers, and all these designers were way better than I was, and it was just like, how do I stand out even more? Because we're in a competitive landscape. So how about I position myself as a Webflow dev? This was 2021 or so. How do I position myself as a Webflow dev so that can be my unique point? Then I was still thinking of, okay, maybe I could get hired as a product designer. So Webflow could be my thing that makes me stand out, as opposed to every other designer that's just doing their own thing. So then I was still smaller minded in the sense that, I could just put it as like I help other designers build their portfolios and stuff. I didn't know that I would be here, so that was how I got here. So I didn't enter the no-code space as a no-code person. It was just, I'm a designer looking for how to differentiate myself, niche more, ways, different ways to stand out, and that's how I found myself in the Webflow space. So, yeah.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. So, regardless of how you got into being a Webflow developer, you saw an opportunity. You saw that there was a gap, right?
Yeah.
There were lots of too many designers who eventually would need to build their portfolios, right? And they would need someone to help them build their portfolio. You being a designer as well, it's beneficial for other designers to have that person that sort of understands where they're coming from, and you have that extra skill to help them translate their design into a full-blown website that people can, visit. So that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned Webflow, you said you dabbled in Framer, Airtable. Can you explain a bit about what those things are, what they do, for those people listening that don't really understand what these things do?
Okay, so there are a lot of no-code tools. I don't use Airtable in my day-to-day, but I have used it in a project before. I'll start with Webflow. So Webflow is basically a no-code website builder, but its edge is that you are basically developing things visually. So a lot of drag and drop tools like Squarespace, Wix, you build your site, but you don't really have to understand how to HTML, CSS and stuff. Using Webflow, you are actually building, I call it visually building. So you have to understand the building blocks of how a website is. You have to understand the box model, HTML, CSS, to at least on a basic level. That's why a lot of people have difficulty learning it, because they think, oh, you just drag and drop like in Figma, and then they get in over their heads. Framer is more design friendly, where Webflow you can come in with a developer mindset. Framer you can come in with your Figma. It's basically it's kind of like, it's not that far from, at least last I checked, it's not that far from Figma. So you get to build your website without thinking too much of how the code works. You still use they have their what they call stacks, I think, where I don't use it in my day-to-day, so I don't. I'm not an expert in Framer, but my understanding of it is you still use Flexbox, but it's not called Flexbox in Framer. It's way more abstracted and it's more toned down. So it's more designed to go live as a website. Where Webflow is, you already have your design and you build your website as if you were using HTML and CSS. Airtable is some form of spreadsheet. That's what it looks like, but it has so many use cases. Some people use it to collect form data, like you can plug Airtable as a form. Some people use it as their backend. So you have your website, and any data you collect on your website, Airtable is your backend, so it stores it in Airtable. So people use Airtable for a bunch of stuff like that. There are also no-code tools for building apps like Bubble and Xano, I think. I've not dabbled into that much because it wasn't my area of interest. Then there is Zapier, Integromat. I think Integromat is now Make. What they do is they set up automations for you. So I have a Webflow site or whatever, even a regular website, and I don't want to do that much coding. Zapier lets you connect things. So if someone logs on your website and they perform an action, if Zapier is plugged into your website, Zapier will wait for that action to happen and then perform something. So store this form data in a Google spreadsheet. Send this form to some form of what do you call those things? Mail subscriber or whatever. So they are different. Send a mail if this happens, stuff like that. So a lot of people use Zapier for that, where they don't want to code, but they want to have all these connections. They call it Zaps. So that's just a taste sort of into several no-code tools. I haven't even scratched the surface. There are some crazy stuff people are doing that I'm not even well versed in. But
Interesting.
yeah, those are the popular ones.
Interesting. My next question would be, so you've sort of explained a bit of, you've somehow answered my next question, but I would still like you to elaborate a bit. So the next question is about use cases. What no-code tools are actually useful for? A lot of people believe no-code tools are here to take over traditional development. Maybe eventually they will, but it seems like from what you are saying, no code tools are essentially what they are, tools that help you
Yeah.
improve on the knowledge that you already have. It makes you do
Yeah.
things easier, like another framework that helps you do things faster, but you still have to understand the underlying principles of it, which, like you explained, Webflow. And you said tools like Framer, they abstract it even more, where they make you feel like you're a designer, but eventually it might not be as powerful as Webflow. I
Yeah.
stand corrected as well. So, in your experience, what are some of the most impactful use cases for no-code tools? Not what the influencers would
Uh,
sell you. What are
yeah.
actually those impactful use cases?
Okay, so what you mentioned about understanding the benefit, the how these things work, like HTML, CSS, that's for Webflow. Like you don't need to, depending on the tool you're using, you don't need to have such a huge understanding. The thing about no code tools is kind of like the more dev knowledge you know, the more you can use the tool. But if you just have if you don't have any dev knowledge at all, you can still find your way around stuff. So that's a misconception people have, that this is going to replace devs or whatever. It's not going to happen anytime soon. We're old enough to remember the Dreamweaver days. Dreamweaver did not replace developers. Wix did not replace developers. Squarespace did not replace developers. Webflow is not going to replace developers. So I don't know. There's always this trend thing that happens. Whenever any new thing comes, everybody's like, "Oh my God, Canva is going to replace designers. Squarespace, you won't need a developer again, blah, 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 blah." I'm like, you people should just calm down. It's not that deep. These are tools. At the end of the day, I always ask a very fundamental question. Who is building the tools? Is it not developers? So you are basically saying that the tool you are using, you are so arrogant to say that the tool that you are using will replace developers. Meanwhile, it is developers that build these tools. So it's the funniest thing ever, I swear. But yeah, one of the best use cases I've seen, over and over, of Webflow and no-code tools is empowering non-technical teams to own their web experiences or their businesses. So, for instance, I've worked with marketing teams a lot, and a huge problem is marketing teams have very high, what's the word I'll use? They have very high stakes and they need to get things done very fast. And when you are in a tech team, the developers are too occupied with their core product, the core experience. And with marketers, there are a lot of streamline. There are a lot of A/B tests. You are bothered about your conversion rates and your bounce rates, all those things. There are so many tests that need to be done. There are so many, Webflow did a survey last year, and 81% of marketing teams don't own their products or their web experience or something. And it causes a lot of friction because the marketing team they are not developers, so they don't have the skill set to own their websites, for instance.
Yeah.
When you work on a lot of websites, for instance, you would realize that something as simple as a placement of a button can increase your conversion rates by 20% or more, right? Now imagine calling a developer to just move a button. That's not going to, they're not going to take you seriously. Or you want to do an A/B test, right? And the A/B test is basically set up this test such that page 1, the button is green. Page 2, the button is yellow. And then your developer is working on something complex like algorithms and data structures. He's not going to take you seriously. So what these things do, for marketing teams especially, is they let them own the web experience, the landing pages, in many cases the websites, and it's just up to them to control that. So it gives developers, if anything, it helps developers because it gives developers more time to focus on what they actually want to focus on, and then it lets the marketing teams have total control. The only time they consult developers is if something is above their heads, maybe they need to connect an API or whatever. But aside from that, if you need to build a web page, you're good. Use Framer, Webflow, you're good. Another use case is, and that's a very big pain point, the marketing teams clashing.
It is. It is.
developers is a very huge pain point. I keep getting surprised how many people use Webflow just because of this thing. Like there's always the developers just can't. It's a thing where it's not even like the devs don't think you're important. It just doesn't make sense to put my time on such a thing where I facing more important things. So everyone has their own focus. So that makes sense. I've noticed a lot of people, that's how they solve it. They get a developer, a Webflow developer, or even an in-house designer or whatever to set up their Webflow stuff, and then they just hand it over to the marketing team. So anything website, marketing team owns it. Anything web app, developers own it, and they only need to meet when there's a connection between the two. So that's one very important use case. The second use case is more like MVP stuff. So you have an idea, you don't have the funds to hire a developer. You can just like connect some no-code tools together to at least test if your idea has any merit before you actually employ developers to do that. The third use case is to actually just run your business using no-code tools. I know someone who his site is on Webflow and he connects using Integromat or is it Make. He connects that and then he uses Airtable. So it kind of runs itself. Everything's automated. So you sign up on the site, you get like emails from him and stuff. It's a whole thing. So there are actual businesses that run their entire business using no code. So what that does is they save money on developer costs. They only hire a developer when there is actually a need for a developer, like maybe you've maxed out the use of your no-code tools or your MVP has been tried and
That makes
tested and
sense.
now you need to build a full-fledged app or a full-fledged website or something and no-code no longer helps you, or you need to scale because I would not, for instance, use Webflow to build a web app. That is for fintech, for instance. You're not going to do that. So that does not make sense. But if you need something that is going to like scale very, very large, then you can now hire a developer. Rather than hiring a developer first, wasting all those resources for an idea that's never been tested. So those are like three major use cases that I've seen.
Yeah, that's extremely valid to be honest. I mean, marketing teams owning the websites and web apps, being owned by the developers is something that I've seen in practice in a couple of companies as well. Because the website is more of a marketing tool. It's more of a marketing tool than a developer focused thing, because the goal of the website is to convert and give impressions and convert as many people as possible. So the marketing team is going to be running a lot of tests on it, and depending on how big your team is, developers are building things on your web app. You don't want to always be pulling them to change this button, make this button bigger. Let the marketing team handle that. Let them be posting their content by themselves, the blog posts, the pages. Let them edit the text by themselves. So it's actually quite fair. It's a very valid point. On to my next question. Let's talk a bit about businesses and clients. How can businesses effectively integrate no-code tools into their existing tech stack? So, for example, I have a team of engineers, and I feel like they are slowing down in a couple of areas. How can I integrate no-code tools to make sure that things are working faster and more effective?
Okay, so it depends. There are so many use cases. So one way is, I've noticed what some people do is that they build front end with Webflow and they export the code and use that. I don't know how efficient that is. People have mixed results with that, but I know that
it doesn't sound very efficient to me.
It doesn't sound efficient.
Yeah,
but I know that works. I know that works with agencies, but it won't work in a tech company. So one thing I like to tell people is that don't mix no-code tools in your tech stack for like the core stuff if you're a big company. But if you want to automate things that that you can abstract from the developers' headache from their table. Do that. So one way, like we mentioned earlier, is to separate your website and your web app. So let the website be run by designers, marketers, then let your web app be run by developers. So doing that to make developers more efficient because they are focused on the core experience, and then marketers are using no-code tools. So that's one way. There are other ways as well. Like for instance, if you're a small team, you might not want to start with burdening your developers with a new app or whatever that you are trying out or you're testing out. So you can just call the designer. Yeah. So you can just build, like I said earlier, an MVP or a proof of concept and test that first. Then when you know that works, to the customer, they won't be able to tell the difference. They won't be able to tell if it's hosted on Webflow or if it's hosted on Framer or whatever. Like you can just do that, and if it works, you can now scale it to join your current core experience. So that way, it even helps you to not model too much, especially with smaller teams as well. So that's what I've noticed. No code right now is a little bit tricky to connect with your main tech stack. It's better to use it for marketing or smaller ideas that you're trying to test out first. But what your engineers can do is, if you're not because not everyone has the luxury of having a big team where you have marketers, you have designers. Your engineers can pick up a no-code tool, and anything marketing related, use Webflow for that. So, or Framer or whatever. So because depending on your skill set, it can be much faster to build a website in Webflow than it is to code it from scratch. So if you need marketing stuff, you can just switch to Webflow for that, or switch to Framer for that. Get that done, ship it, rather than going through using your entire tech stack to do that. So that's my experience. I'm sure that other people in the no-code space will have different approaches for doing things, but I wouldn't mix Webflow in your current tech stack for your core products or Framer or anything at this point. It's possible it could change later in future, depending on where you are and in your company size and your company age.
That's valid. That's very valid. Let's move on to the next question. So this question is from one of our listeners on Twitter. This is from Designer Mo. In her exact words, she's asking, how do you future-proof no-code projects for clients? And she's also asking, what's your strategy when a no-code platform makes major changes, or worse, shuts down, loses funding, fires the entire workforce, stuff like that? Because layoffs do usually happen. So how do you future-proof, essentially?
Yeah, so that's a very important question. One thing I do is I try to not use whatever the newest no-code tool is, because it's not tested and trusted. So there might be a new no-code tool that solves a problem, but they don't have a large user base, they're new, all those things. So it's better to use that to test, but I'll try my best to not use that unless it solves a niche problem that has to be used. Aside from that, only use the big ones that everyone uses. Those ones have incentive to not shut down anytime soon. VC backed, large amount of enterprise consumers and stuff. So you cannot entirely future-proof no-code tools because, like anything, there are companies and stuff. But I would prioritize using no-code tools that give you some form of exit strategy. Like you can export your CM, you can export your CMS, you can export your code and stuff. Because no matter what tool you're using, if it's no code, there's some cost to leave it. Like WordPress, for instance, if you want to move from WordPress to Webflow, there's a cost. If you want to move from Webflow to WordPress, there's a cost. You can't entirely future proof. The best you can do is in the moment gauge the cost of it to the cost to benefit ratio. So even if Webflow in quotes shuts down in like 5, 10 years, and your marketing team has been able to run hundreds of marketing landing pages, you've already made your profit back. So that's how I would approach it. That again, that's part of the reasons why I say I would not put no code tools as part of your major tech stack unless you're a smaller company. Unless you're a smaller company looking to scale later. But I would not move a big company's tech stack to no code. It doesn't make sense.
Okay. That actually makes a lot of sense, to be honest. And if I may add, you cannot entirely future proof everything. Even if you are using a framework, programming language, and even if you are coding it, if you're using PHP needs security updates every other month. They are dropping updates. You have to continue updating it. If you're using React, Next.js, Nuxt.js, there's going to be updates. There's going to be security patches. If you want to make changes and install new dependencies, there would be that dependency that you're using that you've not updated in like 5 years. Is going to cause problems. You're always going to need to make updates. You're always going to need to maintain stuff. So it's always good to use things that have a large community behind them. Like you said, if you see a new tool, it makes sense to test them out with like small, inconsequential projects. Is it inconsequential or non-consequential? You should get what I mean.
I think it's inconsequential.
Inconsequential, okay. It's always good to use them on like small projects, but for your big, most important projects, it's always good to use the frameworks or the no-code tools that have a large community. People are constantly giving feedback, they're constantly updating it. Those are the ones that would stand the test of time. Just like anything else, even if you're coding and building your code, you still need to update it as well. Yeah, I think we've answered that. And Designer Mo, I hope we've been able to answer your question. Okay.
Hope so.
Yeah, I sincerely hope so. So my next question is going to be about limitations. And I feel like we've touched on it, but let's see if we can go deeper, a little bit deeper. From your experience, are there any challenges or limitations that you've encountered using Webflow or Airtable or Framer or all these other tools?
Yeah, so one thing I've learned in the no-code space is that the more they abstract you from the code, the less control you have. For instance, there are some things I can do in Webflow that I cannot do in Framer because Framer is trying to not be as technical as Webflow. But the problem is the less technical you make your product, the less control you would have. So there are certain types of maybe interactions or integrations rather that you could do easily that you might struggle to do. That's one limitation. The second limitation is that it's more of a misconception in the sense that people say no code a lot, which is true, but it's more of low code in the sense that to properly take advantage of low code and no code tools, you will need like some code. It doesn't matter if you wrote it yourself or AI wrote it or you copied it from a developer board or whatever, or a community forum. To extend the limitations of these tools, you will need some form of code. Not to start with, but eventually you would. For instance, there are certain interactions that Webflow can do, but you will need code to do it. There are certain integrations you need to put in Webflow, like if you want to connect your APIs, for instance, you're not going to type it in Webflow, connect this API. You're going to have to use some code to do that. So those are some of the limitations. Also, feature sets as well. Almost every project I've worked on, there has been some requirements that is not part of the feature set of the tool, right? So for instance, there was this job board that was it a job board? There was a website I was working on, and basically what the website needed was, based on what is in the URL, the parameters in the URL, it would change what shows on the website, right? If you tell a regular person who is in no code, they'll probably run away from that task, because there's no way to do that in Webflow without either an external app or without some form of code, right? So
Yeah,
each
I remember this one.
website. So each website has its own, or each website, each business, each project has its own unique sets, and it's hard to build an all-encompassing tool that will solve everybody's problems. So depending on what you need to do, you need to extend the limitations. That's part of the reasons why a lot of people love Webflow, because there are provisions for adding your own code to build on top of it. Basically, everybody, all these developers who are chasing away, will still need them eventually, or some form of coding knowledge. But this is not to like make anybody feel bad about no code. You can still use no code without code, but you hit a ceiling eventually that you need to start plugging in some code to get it to work more efficient.
Especially when clients start requesting for features that the tool you are using does not have. So you need to extend those things with code, essentially. So yeah, that's cool.
Either code or another no code tool. Which
that might cost you more money.
Yeah. So you do your cost benefit analysis on that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So do you think developers should try no code tools, or do you think most or all developers should try no code tools, or they shouldn't?
I would not pretend to know what most developers should do. But I think like AI, you should at least know what's going on there, because you never know what would make your work easier and faster. So I know of people that use Webflow for certain tasks because it just makes it faster to do. Like I know a guy that runs a studio, and certain clients, he just uses Webflow to do this stuff. He can code, but he just uses Webflow to do it because to him, is much faster and it's much simpler to do that. So I think a lot of developers, rightfully so, have like a chip on their shoulder because the work is very hard to do. So they see no code as beneath them. But I just feel like you should just see what's going on there. If it doesn't make sense, you drop it. If not, just see what's going on there every now and then. So kind of like copywriters and AI. Right, a copywriter will vomit if you tell them to use AI, probably, or when AI started coming out. But at least there are so many ways to use AI to enhance your work without making AI do the work for you. So I think no code is similar to that. There might just be stuff that would have taken you much longer to do, and you can just use like a no code tool to do it. So I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, I think so too. And one thing I've realized is some of these tools use very interesting best practices that even you as a developer can learn from if you study how they do things. So that might be beneficial as well. But yeah, let's move on to the next question. So let's shift our focus to beginners in the industry. Are there specific resources or communities that you can recommend to people that are interested in no-code development or no-code tools? Let's say that.
All right. So, for instance, I think you should just like explore with different tools. For Webflow and Framer specifically, because those are the ones that I've seen more of. Webflow has Webflow University. So just type Webflow University or university.webflow.com. They make very amazing courses. It's actually quite brilliant because it's part of their whole sales thing where Webflow is difficult to learn for some people. So Webflow makes their own courses that you can watch to know how to use the tool. I think Framer kind of followed suit with theirs. So if you want to learn Framer has their own resources you can learn. Those are the ones that I can say would be good right now. I currently am still looking around to see what's going on and stuff. But that's it. That's where you can start. And if you see any no-code tool, just basically search for if there are tutorials on it and just see what you can build with those. At the end of the day, all the tutorials and courses will not be useful for you if you don't actually build stuff.
Yeah.
So you see a problem, try and figure out how you would use no-code to solve it for as low cost as possible, and you'll be surprised what you can come up with.
Okay, that's valid advice. Let's shift focus to the future. So Mr. Daniel, I'll stop.
Inside joke for the last episode. If you want to understand what's going on, go and watch that one. I'm not going to recap on that.
Yeah. I'll stop eventually. So yeah, let's look into the future. Let's look into the future a bit. How do you see no-code tools influencing the future of job roles in tech? So do you see it's already
influencing job roles, just not on a large scale yet. So I've seen a lot of job posts for web designers, and in web designers you see can use Webflow there. You see Webflow designer, you see web designer / Webflow developer, you see stuff like that, you see things like that. And it's not like, oh, you're a product designer, you must use Webflow in your job or whatever. But I've seen more job posts like just slotting a no-code tool there as a plus if you can use. How I see the future of that happening is, if you are some form of person in the tech space, it's an added bonus if you have access to no-code tools you can use. It's the more the tech space grows, or the more anything grows, the more you need to stand out. And it makes more sense if you are someone that can actually go and build something yourself. So there's also something about Webflow, for instance. PMs use Webflow, marketers use Webflow, designers use Webflow, founders use Webflow. It's basically this thing where we are living the age of my role is just one thing. Like, you need to provide value in other ways. So no-code tools might be that, in the sense that when you join a company, or when you're trying to join a company, you are one of those people that can actually build things. You are one of the people that can do proof of concepts and just get things done, as opposed to just having ideas. So as a designer, if you can actually build your idea, you instantly have more value, because you can communicate to developers what you want more clearly. You can move to markets much faster without having to push a task to a developer. If you're a PM, for instance, you'll be forced to understand more of how things are built. It will give you more. It will make your communication with like other people in your team much easier to handle. And there are just some cases where some things are just not that important for other people in your team. So you can just take ownership and just get it done yourself. And if it has proof of concept, they can always revamp it and get it done that way. There are just so many, and this is just different. This is not just like, building Webflow websites. It might be, I need to just quickly set up a form, and I use Airtable to do that, rather than trying to get someone to build an entire experience for me. So that's what I'm seeing happen, where the more saturated your job role is in the market, the more you need to be able to stand out. And one of the ways you can stand out is being someone that can take initiative. And without learning how to code, you need to be able to figure out how to build things. It's that no excuse mindset. So if you're the kind of person that is struggling to get a job, you can just go and build things by yourself and use that as a proof of concept, as opposed to waiting for someone to build things for you, which in turn gives you more value. And that's aside from companies just straight up adding it to their job list. It should be proficient in this. So that's what I see.
Facts. I 100% agree, to be honest. 100%, 1000% agree. It just gives you more value. More value. And the more people find out how useful it is, like you just explained some of these use cases, like it's useful for the marketing teams, it's useful for PMs, it's useful for the founders. The more people find out how useful it is and how much more work you need to do to set up all these things manually, more roles would start opening up. You would start seeing more Webflow developer roles, more Framer developer roles. And if you have the knowledge and you are keeping up with the updates, you are going to become indispensable.
Yeah. And some companies might not be able to justify hiring a Webflow developer as a full-time staff. So they would want someone who can do your job, but like just Webflow or Framer on the side. So automatically you have more value, just like that.
Yeah.
So it's just, I know that we all want to get to that point where like we do our thing. A company is not paying us one salary for 2 roles or whatever, but in being in the real world, sometimes you just have to do more than your current job role to show more value so that you can climb up the ladder and stuff. So I've noticed it's like sometimes you just pitch no code to your team. Like maybe your team is struggling to get a task done, and then you just go on and build something, show it as a proof of concept. Automatically, you are valuable because you got something done much faster than everyone else could do. That's one of the things that Webflow did. It's one of the case studies on their site. I've forgotten what company it was for, but they reduced their developer tickets, where rather than just sending tickets to developers, their other teams just got stuff done. So if you now need it to be part of your core product, then the developer can now come in and solve that. Yeah, it's like how before being a web designer, you till today you still don't need Figma per se to design a website, but because it's now more industry standard, no one will hire you if you can't use like Figma or Sketch. So I feel like along the way, eventually it will just become one of these things where you should just, even if you don't need it, you should just like at least know what's going on.
Yeah, that's dope. And I think we've been able to cover, at least what everyone needs to know about the usefulness of these things. I appreciate the fact that we are doing this. It's very important because the content that I see online can be a bit misleading.
Yeah.
They make it seem more than it is, and then you miss the usefulness of the whole thing.
The usefulness,
you miss the actual use case, the actual usefulness. So people that actually need it might not know that they need it because they think it's something that it's not. So thanks for hopping on again, man. Do you have any shameless plugs? I was begging you last time. You refused to drop shameless.
It's the same as the last episode, Brian. If you need a Webflow developer, I can build Webflow sites for you and design them as well. If you need to figure out how to involve Webflow and no-code tools in your team, reach out to me. I would help you consult with that. That's my shameless plug. I don't have any course or any books to sell at the moment.
At the moment, yeah. So how can people reach out to you? Still LinkedIn?
Yeah, still LinkedIn. You might have noticed I barely tweet these days. So just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
All right. Don't worry, once you type Daniel Abudu, you would know.
Exactly. Anybody that does not look like this is not me.
Yeah. You would know. Okay.
You will know.
Let me put my own shameless plug. So this what's that look on your face?
Please,
All right.
please, I'm not a hater. Please plug everything that has to be plugged. I'm not
All right.
someone to get in the way of somebody's bread. Plug.
Nah,
Plug it.
it's, I'm sure they know that. So this podcast, The Pulse of Tech, is powered by Dola Studio. Dola is a strategic partner for rapid growing companies in need of product and engineering guidance, as well as scalable design systems. So check us out at www.dola.studio. And the podcast specifically, you can engage with us on social media at Pulse of Tech Pod on all platforms. So follow us. Our follower count has been increasing, but it's not fast enough. Follow the podcast and engage with the content, share, like, subscribe. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me personally, LinkedIn as well, Lady Adeniyi. You cannot miss it. Whoever whoever yes, just like Daniel, whoever looks like this, that's most likely me, unless there's another Lady Adeniyi out there. I have no idea. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been amazing. All right. Stay tuned in the future for more insightful conversations. So, yeah, peace out, guys. Yeah, I told you, shorter episode, 15 minutes.
Shut up by 10 minutes.
Yeah, shorter. Welcome. All right, let's start.